happen. We get it wrong. Do you know what I mean? Good evening, folks. Thanks for coming in. Hope you're all safe and well. And I hope you're getting a wee bit of heat wave. 27 degrees down with this young lady stays.
Hello. I'm melting.
Tonight, I'm joined by, yet again, Tarot Tracey, our little friend. And we are going to be continuing our series on Henry VIII and his wives. We've already covered Henry himself, Anne Boleyn, Catherine of Aragon. Tonight we're going to be talking, I nearly said Catherine again. Tonight we're going to be talking about Henry's third and fourth wives, Jane Seymour and Anne of Cleves. Now, I will state for the offset that we're not experts and we may get some details wrong, but our last two shows have been fairly okay.
We've done all right, haven't we? We've got by.
We got by the skin of our nose, you know. So, you know, we might get some details wrong. We might get some details even right. You never know. But two is a big fans of the Tudor era, aren't we, dear?
We certainly are. Absolutely love that era. You can't really get enough of it, Scott, can you, to be honest, because it's just so fascinating. And it's a period in time that people still talk about now, don't they? You know, over and over again, they just talk about it. And I think we said before, didn't we? Because we did a little chat show back in January about Henry. And then we did a chat show back in February about Catherine of Aragon and Anne Boleyn. So if you want to go back to those two, anybody that's watching and watch those two episodes, it kind of puts them in order, doesn't it? But it's always fascinating to talk about them. And as I said earlier, I've just re-binged watched the series of the Tudors on Amazon Prime, and it was just fantastic. Just totally absorbed into it for the last 2 weeks.
You did get absorbed. There's our Laura. Good evening, Tracy.
Hi, Laura.
Well. Hello, dear Gaffer. No, I'd say Tidy sent my thing. No, I'd say Tidy sent my thing, but being polite, saying hello.
Okay.
Right. Tudors. So what she means is, I know I said Tudors weren't her thing.
Okay.
We're getting it through in drips and drabs, Tracy.
We need a translator.
No, Laura's got a new phone. And
okay.
I think she's still coming to grips with the typing aspect of it.
Okay. I do that quite often when you're typing a response and you hit send before you finished it. So it comes up in different little sentences, doesn't it?
It does. But Laura's not, she hates her phone.
Oh, bless her.
She's not a fan of the Tudors, which I find very, very strange. But, you know.
Each to their own.
We won't go down there. But no, I know what you mean about typing. I always do it with posts. See, when I'm writing a post, I do it as a draft first, and I put it in my email drafts, right? And I'll read it over, and it'll look fine. And then I'll post it, and it's after I posted it on the page that I noticed the spelling errors in it. Like, see, that one they put up, was it this morning or yesterday?
Yeah.
I knew to correct me on it.
I can't.
When I'm reading it, it looks fine. And then it's always after I post it, I think, oh, that's wrong. That's wrong. How did I not notice that?
And you know what? Sometimes though, predictive messaging on phones changes things, because I type a text and I read it and then I send it to somebody and then I read it back and it's changed a word totally. And I think, no, I didn't type that. You know,
then the person mails you back and you say, what do you mean? We talk about dance.
What the hell are you on about?
You know, I dance or something. That's not what I'm, you know. Laura usually corrects me, but she's been slipping up the past, you know, she's been letting her duty slide the last couple of weeks with correcting my punctuation and my spelling. But no, again, back to the Tudors, as Tracy says, if you look back in the YouTube channel, you see the first and second episode, whatever you like to call it. But the Tudors, we watched it, I don't know, 3 times the entire thing. And I say, Laura's not a fan. There's a lot of people who's know their cup of tea, which is fine. But the amount of people that talk about it, the amount of documentaries, the amount of on TikTok as well, you know, YouTube, etc. And the amount of historians that still talk about the. I mean, there was many other eras in British history, you know. Need disrespect
exactly. But there's something fascinating about that, isn't there? The Tudors just always draws you in. I think it's all of the love and the scandal and the politics and the brutality of it. You know, when we talked about Henry VIII before, he was a really brutal ruler in the end, wasn't he? He burnt people. He boiled people, he tortured people, not himself, but he sent people to do it on his behalf, didn't he? And it was such a brutal era. And it's really hard to watch when you watch documentaries or reconstructions or like the Tudors that we've watched, because that's quite graphic as well. And, you know, it's just such a brutal, gruesome time.
I like all that stuff. I don't think it's hard to watch. I love blood and guts. I love to see people losing body parts. I really do.
Well, it's
eyeball. There's a scene. I'm a big Saw fan. See the films, Saw films.
I can't watch horror films.
See what I mean? What is it with people these days? Well, you've heard of the Saw films.
Oh yeah, I have. Yeah.
Well, Saw, the last one, Saw X. One of the things in it, the guy's strapped into a chair, and he's got these two hoses connected to his eyes. And they're connected to a big industrial vacuum cleaner.
Oh my God, I don't need to know anymore.
He's got 60 seconds to break 5 of his fingers.
Oh my goodness.
He doesn't do it, I think he only manages 3. And then after the vacuum cleaner starts up, and you actually hear the noise. Sarah hates it. She hates that noise. But you hear the actual noise of the eyes. And away they go down the tube. And I love all that stuff.
I hate it absolutely. Even
chopping my heads.
I love spooky things. I love paranormal, but I still can't watch it if it's in a film.
But you see, the Saw, I wouldn't class Saw films as horror, total horror.
After what you just described.
Oh, there is. They are very, very graphic, very, very brutal. But if you watch them, you realise that there's actually, I mean, there's that was Saw X came out. I think there's been 10 Saw films, but if you watch them, then it's actually a story that carries on through each film, and each film is different for the last. Each film opens up. I had the guy, one of the stars, Detective Hoffman, Costas Mandalore. We had him on the show last year, and that's what I was saying to him. He's kind of like Jigsaw's apprentice, but I says every film opens up a different can of worms.
Right, okay.
You know, and it sets your mind thinking, right, who's this? What did they do? How did that happen? How's that pot? And, you know, and then the next film kind of explains it, but adds more onto it.
Yeah, well, I'll leave you with those. You can
enjoy those. Have I not sold you on the idea?
I'll just go and watch The Sound of Music while you watch the Saw films.
You watch that, because there's plenty of blood and guts with Julie Andrews and Tap a Hill with Sheep, which is questionable to me, but we won't go there. It's not that kind of show. But I get back to Henry. As you say, it was
Henry.
Towards the latter part of his life, his reign, he was quite brutal. You know, he did change. When he started out, when he first became king, as we said the first show, he wanted to show. Well, there's two sides to him when he took the throne, because he wanted to show that he was a compassionate king. He told his people, you know, I'm going to be fair, the country's going to prosper. But I think because he took the throne at a young age, there was enemies his father still about, and he wanted, I think he felt himself, he had to prove himself that he was the king. And this is why he had two of his father's closest, biggest enemies executed within 2 weeks of him being crowned.
That's right,
to show, you know, I'll be a fair king, but I'm not a silly wee boy, so don't mess with me.
Yeah.
You know, but then a lot of it was blamed on his jousting accident.
I was just going to say that. I think we said the last time, didn't we, when he had his jousting accident? I think that really changed his personality, because he became very sort of bitter and twisted then, didn't he? And quite paranoid as well. You know, there's paranoia about him.
he was very paranoid, but then he didn't really get a lot of help because he'd all different people pulling him in all different directions, telling him, you know,
Yeah.
Privy Council, Wolseley, you know, everybody was
They were all
telling him.
manipulators, weren't they?
And they were doing it so they could get their own piece of the pie, basically. You know, they wanted to climb the ladder through the council and what have you, and be the king's right hand man. So
Yeah,
if
he
they've been
was very
getting,
manipulated.
I think he would have been getting hit for all sides.
Yeah.
You know, and then with the brain, they says it was a brain injury.
Yeah.
With the brain injury,
It changes your personality, doesn't it?
it was just basically it was just spot. They said the estimate is about 72,000 people were executed under his reign.
Which is shocking, isn't it? It's really, really shocking.
It's a lot of people, you know, and see poisoners, they were boiled alive. You know, treason was beheading. No less you were a woman, then it was burning. High treason
hung, drawn, and quartered, weren't they?
Was the hung, drawn, and quartered. But you could be hung for anything. You could be hung for something like stealing a loaf of bread.
Yeah, I know. It was just, it was shocking. It really was a shocking time, but still a fascinating time, you know, with everything that went on. You know, you can, like we say, you can never get enough of it. And we talked about Catherine of Aragon. She was his very strong wife for many years, who was his Catholic support. And then, of course, Anne came along. We've talked about these previously, but Anne came along, Anne Boleyn, and she caught his eye, and he became besotted with her, so much so that the Reformation happened. He broke away from the Catholic Church. And then, as we know, Anne then started to make enemies in court, and everybody started to turn on her. She had many allegations against her. And she was beheaded. But before she was beheaded, the beautiful and demure Jane Seymour had already caught his attention, hadn't she? Because she was in court, and she had learnt the harsh politics of court, because she was a lady in waiting to Catherine of Aragon and Anne Boleyn. So she had witnessed everything that had gone on. So I guess when she was on the scene, and when Henry started to show an interest in her, she kind of knew, even though I think she was quite a quiet and demure person, I think she knew that she had to keep, you know, a very kind of composure about her, because Henry was drawn to her because she was the opposite to Anne Boleyn, who had been very feisty, very outspoken, very flirtatious, where I feel that Jane was the opposite. She really, really captured the attention of Henry VIII, so much so that he was trying to pursue her when he was still with Anne Boleyn, and he would send her gold coins that she refused to accept, because she said she didn't want to lose her virtue. She didn't want to ruin her reputation. She didn't want to be his mistress, because he was still married to Anne. All of the daggers and all of the knives were going in the back of Anne Boleyn already at the time. So Henry was really manipulated, and also being poisoned against his own wife, Anne. Jane had come in on the scene, and, you know, the course was set for his next wife to sort of be lined up. So Jane Seymour came from a very respectable family. Her father was Sir John Seymour, who was a knight. Her mother was Marjorie Wentworth, who was from a very respectable family. She had siblings. She had John. She had Edward. Edward would later become the Duke of Somerset, and he'd play a big part in Jane's son later on in life. She spent a lot of her childhood in Wolf Hall in Wiltshire. So she was born in 1508. We don't know exactly when she was born, the date or anything, but we know it was 1508. And she spent a very nice childhood being brought up in Wolf Hall in Wiltshire. It would have been a modest education at home, with a well-connected family. So she would have learned a little bit about politics, but it was very much family orientated. She would have done needlework. She would have learnt music. She would have learnt dancing. So all of the things that you do to prepare a lady to, you know, or a young girl to enter into the world at that time. And so, as I say, she was then put into the court as a lady in waiting, first of all, to Catherine of Aragon, and then Anne Boleyn. And then this is when she started to catch the eye of Henry. So portraits again were painted of her after her lifetime by the chap that has painted all the other portraits. It was Holbein. Yeah, absolutely. And it shows a woman of sort of grace and composure, and sort of a very gentle looking lady. She was said to have had modest beauty. She had light brown hair, brown eyes, allegedly. We don't know for sure, but we can only go by the portraits. She had fair skin, and she was very quiet. She was very gentle, and she had a soft demeanour about her. And this really, really appealed to Henry, because, as we said, with Anne Boleyn before, who was the opposite, was feisty and argumentative and outspoken, Jane was the opposite, and this really, really appealed to Henry. So she got more and more ingratiated into court. Off with Anne Boleyn's head, very sadly, as we know how that ended. And then very, very soon after, Jane and Henry actually got married. So she was Henry's third wife, and just at the age of 28, she got married to Henry, and the next phase of his life started. So it was really, quite interesting how he went from one extreme to the other. And also with her faith, Jane Seymour would have predominantly been a Catholic. And as we know, Henry with the Reformation had broken away from the Catholic Church.
Mm-hmm.
So everybody had to sign a document to say that they were going to let go of the Catholic faith. They were going to become Protestants. So although she still had that Catholic background, she sort of went along with Henry's way. But as we know, a lot of her and her ladies in waiting used to read books about Catholicism, and they would hide them away. It was quite a dangerous time, even for the wives, because at the time he'd only beheaded Anne Boleyn, so she wasn't particularly fearful. But I think when she started to give an opinion about politics, Henry gently reminded her, remember what happened to my last wife, and put her in place. And I think after that, she didn't speak out of turn ever again. So,
she had her opinions, and as you say, it was a dangerous time, because Anne had just been beheaded, basically.
Yeah.
He broke away from the church and what have you, and he was getting everybody to sign the oath.
That's right. Oath. Yeah, oath. That's it.
And if you didn't sign it, basically you were classed as a heretic.
Yeah.
And we know where they ended up. So, I mean, look at Thomas More.
I know. It's so sad when you learn about Thomas More, because I feel like he was a lovely man. Really lovely man.
He was one of Henry's mentors growing up, when he was very, very young. And he was very, very close to him, even after he became king.
Yeah.
But even he refused to sign the oath. And as we all know from watching the Tudors and reading up about it, Henry threw him in the tower. And he was in there for some time, and all his family begged him, just sign it. It's just a bit of paper. Sign it, but he still refused. And Henry didn't hesitate in executing him.
I know, and it was so sad, wasn't it? Because people back then, it just proves how strong their faith was, because they were prepared to die and to sacrifice themselves for their faith. Mm-hmm. They couldn't go against their own beliefs. They couldn't sign the oath because it was so against what they believed in and what they'd been brought up to believe in. Their faith was so strong. And that's what's so amazing about that era, isn't it? That so many people died for their faith when they could have been saved if they'd only just signed the oath.
A simple bit of paper. Yeah. And that probably played on Jane's mind as well.
Yeah.
I might be wrong, but Jane's probably sitting there saying, right, I'm Henry's wife.
Yeah.
But he never hesitated in executing Thomas. So, and look what happened to Anne. So, after he gave her the gentle reminder of who he was and to basically know your place, I think that's what, I think she would have got a shock. They'd actually say something, because he's more or less saying to her, do as you're told or you're going to end up in the scaffold.
Yeah, remember what happened to my last wife, I think, were the words that he was allegedly reported
to. So basically that's, you do as I tell you, you're unalive, basically, you know. So I think with that would have made a big impact on her life as well, realising that this man that had treated her so well, etc., then with these was just turn around and say that to her. You know, and that goes to show what kind of man he ended up as well.
Exactly.
You know, it's all right saying it to members of your court, you know, like Thomas More, Charles Brandon, Cromwell, that people with that, but to say it to your own wife.
That must have been quite a shock for her, mustn't it? A bit of a wake-up call. So she was only 28. They got married on the 30th of May in 1536, very soon after Anne Boleyn was beheaded. And she was very well received in court by many people because of her family, her well-connected family, who were quite ambitious, and because of her nature. And also she was very keen on making good friends with Mary, obviously Henry's first daughter, and also Elizabeth. She really wanted to befriend them and try and gently introduce them back into court. Which she did, because Henry had kind of sent them off to various palaces or houses to be well looked after, but he didn't really have much to do with them. So Jane was very much for gradually sort of bringing them back into court and befriending them and getting Henry to sort of pay more attention to them. So she was quite integral in that, really, which was really, really lovely. And I truly believe that Henry did fall in love. I feel like he loved all of his wives in different ways, but there was something very special about Jane Seymour. He truly did love her. And of course, a year later, she gave birth to Henry's only son, his only living son, that he had been desperate to have, this male heir. So this beautiful woman that he'd fallen in love with then produced this male heir. And as we know, sadly, she died only a couple of days later following complications. And Henry was really heartbroken and sort of, went into a dark place for a long time, even though he'd got his son that he'd always wanted. He'd got it at a cost because he'd lost his beautiful wife. So it was a really tragic, short and sad love story, really, with his time with Jane Seymour. But her achievement really was to produce the male heir for Henry, who was Edward VI. And she really carried on the Tudor dynasty by being able to give this heir to Henry. So she had such an impact on the Tudor history just in a short time that she was with it. She was in Henry's life, and she was buried alongside Henry, or should I say he was buried alongside her. He really wanted to be buried with his queen that he loved. And she's buried in St. George's Chapel at Windsor Castle. And he said to be buried along with her. So she was the only wife, that he wanted to be with in the afterlife.
I think that shows, someone's going to say was, as you say, Henry married Jane shortly after Anne was executed.
Yeah.
I think there was a bit of planning ahead done. I think Henry was quite famous for planning ahead, if you look back.
Yeah.
Because he married Anne Boleyn in secret, basically. But he still married, before him and Catherine were divorced or annulled, whatever you want to call it. He'd already married. And then if you look at Anne Boleyn, Anne Boleyn hadn't even been executed. Henry he'd already ordered the swordsman before the trial. Jane Seymour's in the picture. Yeah. So, in my mind, Henry's already got this marriage planned. And we all know that Anne Boleyn's trial was just a formality.
I know.
She's already condemned anyway. And so I think Henry's got all this planned. So you imagine he's planned all this out, and everything's working out, and he's fell in love with this third wife. Maybe he didn't plan to fall in love with her, but he did. And then all of a sudden he's got this son that he's wanted for years and years, and his last two wives couldn't give him. He's got the one thing. Let's face it, as we've said before, a male heir was a major thing back then.
Yeah,
after many kings, it was, everybody wanted a male heir. Even though they could have 25 daughters, but
Yeah.
the thing was really a male heir.
Yeah.
So they could carry on the line of succession, and I think it was a kind of image thing as well. So this would have been playing Henry's mind. He's finally he's got this son, and he's a man, and he's the king, and my Tudor name's going, and then all of a sudden, Jane gets snatched away from him basically within a couple of days.
I know, it's so sad, isn't it? And going back to producing a male, when you think the length of time that he was married to Catherine of Aragon, she could never give him a male heir. It was stillborns, stillbirths, or obviously she produced Bloody Mary in the end, Mary I. And then Anne Boleyn produced Elizabeth I. So really strong women that they produced, but they couldn't produce a male. So they do think there could well have been a problem with Henry, although having said that, he did produce a male heir with Jane Seymour. But there was certainly something not quite right, because there were so many miscarriages, stillbirths, died in infancy, so a lot went on. He had, at a very young age, he had suffered a heck of a lot of loss. He'd had his leg problems, his ulcers on his legs. He had his jousting injury. This all went on over a period of time, as we know, and it would have changed his personality. But he did have a lot to contend with in his personal life. He absolutely felt that he couldn't quite get it right. He lost a lot of popularity with, denouncing Catherine of Aragon. She was a very popular queen, and it was so sad. He was so cruel to her because, as we said before, she was sent away to various castles, various palaces. Gradually, her friends were taken away from her. Her ladies in waiting were taken away from her, and she probably died with a broken heart. And then Anne Boleyn, we know the story of Anne Boleyn. She seems to be the most famous of the queens. And she does,
I think we said this on the last show as well. I need disrespect to the other queens, but Anne Boleyn seems to be the main one, even though his marriage to Catherine was the longest marriage he had. I think it was between 21, 25 years. It was a long time.
Yeah, it was
they were married. But
he was only with Anne for 3 years, wasn't he? Anne Boleyn for 3 years.
So it was nothing, time-wise compared to two of them. But Anne Boleyn seems to be the one that everybody concentrates on, myself as well.
I know, me too. Yeah, absolutely. That she's the one that we all seem to be obsessed with because of her feisty, flirty, fun personality. But to her own detriment, I think she was too outspoken. Excuse me. So, like I said, she lost her popularity in court, didn't she? And she didn't do herself any favour. Wasn't very discreet around court. We'll never know for sure exactly what was said, but we definitely feel like she was set up, wasn't she, with the things that people said about her?
Aye, it's 100% conclusion. Anne Boleyn was innocent. Said many, even Henry himself after he was executed, the light bulb kind of came on with him, and he knew
I think so.
it had all been fabricated. It was one big setup, and then with Jane Seymour, totally different for Anne, and
beautiful, gentle personality.
She was trying to bring Elizabeth and Mary back into the fold.
Yeah, that's right.
And I don't think it had anything to do with the line of succession or anything. I think it was because that's the kind of person she was, because it was father and daughter.
Yeah.
Forget the fact that he was king and they were his daughters, and as I say, the line of succession and all the rest of it.
Yeah.
I think it's just the fact that there was a father and two daughters who basically weren't seeing each other. Jane was that kind of nature that, well, if I can bring that father and daughter together again, then
and she was very popular after Anne as well, because we said she was such a different personality that she was a very popular choice of wife for Henry. She represented him well. She was very nurturing. She was very caring. She did come from an ambitious family, because her brothers who were in court, as you know, Edward played a really big part. He was one of Henry's senior advisors, and he plays, quite a big part later on when he's Duke of Somerset, and he kind of looks after Jane's son later on in his younger years when Jane is no longer around. So they were very ambitious. So although she was quite quiet and demure and serene, it makes you wonder how much of a pawn she was with her family, you know, being pushed in front of Henry VIII because her family was so ambitious and they were very, very keen for her to be in court, you know, for their own benefit, really. Like a lot of the people in court were quite ambitious back in that day. They all had their own agenda.
You know, how can we get up the ladder quicker? You know,
exactly. Yeah.
I think the other thing that speaks volumes about, you said, you know, Henry fell in love with Jane, but, you know, he did basically, is the fact that, you know, Jane was the third wife, so there's another 3 to go, basically. So you're talking about quite a few years. But after, you know, before he died, he specified that he wanted to be buried. Now, he was a king of England. He could have been buried in Westminster Abbey, anywhere. But he specified that he wanted to be buried next to Jane, who had died.
That was really important to him, wasn't it?
It was a big thing for him. He wanted to be buried next to this woman who died, you know, X amount of years before him, rather than anybody else. So I think he still held that love for her, even though he went through another 3 marriages. She was the one that really stuck out. Now, was it because it was a genuine love for her, or was it because she gave him a male heir, or a combination of both?
I think it was a bit of both. That's how I like to feel. The romantic side of me likes to think that he truly did love her, but also even more so it was cemented because she produced the male heir that he'd wanted, you know, for so many years. When you think how long he was with Catherine of Aragon, over 20 years, he was with Anne Boleyn for 3 years. And then it wasn't until he was with Jane Seymour that he finally had that son. He had that secured male heir. So that must have been a huge impact for him, a huge positive impact for him. But then, as we say, at the sad loss of Jane. So.
And then, of course, he went into seclusion for a long time after that.
Yeah, he did. He went into a very deep, dark depression. He didn't want to see anybody, didn't want to speak to anybody. He was paranoid, so he locked his son away, and he had only certain people looking after him because he didn't want him to catch any illnesses, any diseases. He just wanted to keep him safe, to make sure that he was secure to be the male heir. So he took him away from court, basically. He didn't see much of his son to start with because he wanted to keep him safe and protected and secure. So it was sad for the children when you think about it. It was such a weird lifestyle because they were born into this, you know, this kingdom, this court that they didn't really have much to do with. They didn't really see their parents. They were looked after by strangers in a way, even though I like to think most of them were looked after by good people. We like to think that. It must have been quite a strange upbringing for them, mustn't it?
It would have been. I mean, you put yourself in the eyes, you know, a kid, you know, they want to see their mum and dad. They want to spend time with their mum, regardless whether, you know, they're king and queen of England or whatever. You know, obviously that plays a big part. But at the end, you take away all that kind of stuff, it's still mum and dad, mother and father, whatever they called them back then. But and they're getting shifted for pillar to post, all these big stately, you know, houses, castles, and they've got somebody different looking after them, you know, maybe each week or whatever. And I mean, even Henry, you know, let's jump back for Henry for a wee second, but you know, Henry's childhood, he was the same.
Yeah.
Because Arthur was the firstborn, so he was in the limelight.
Yeah, absolutely.
And Henry was not put away, but he was
the spare.
He was the spare, basically, so he was kept, you know, out of sight. He was still well looked after. All his sons, the king's son, but he was the exact same as you know, Mary, Elizabeth, Edward.
Yeah. And if you think about it, Scott, even with our royal family now, our king, Prince Charles, he wasn't brought up by his mother or his father. You know, he was brought up by nannies, and the Queen Mother played more of a part in his upbringing. So it's almost the same now with the royal family, not so much for the younger generations, because, for instance, Kate and William, they're very hands-on parents. Meghan and Harry, even though obviously they've fallen out with us a little bit, haven't they? They're still, you know, very hands-on parents, but the generation above that, even to that generation, they still had a similar upbringing in a way to how they were brought up in the Tudor period, because they were brought up by strangers, by nannies, by governesses. So not how much has changed.
Not very much.
No, not at all.
It's
when
still...
you think about it, with the royal family, it's a strange, they call it an institution, don't they? And it is a very strange institution. And I guess you only really truly know it if you're on the inside.
Aye, or you're one of the kids, you know. But
Yeah.
so Jane, you know, that's Jane. She's passed away, sadly. She's out of the picture now. Henry goes into seclusion. I was going to say illusion.
Yeah,
illusion.
And
when he finally, I forgot what I was going to say. When he finally starts to come around, he's realising he needs wife number 4.
And Thomas Cromwell is already under pressure, because I think he's already, Henry is already having doubts about Thomas Cromwell, because he was instrumental in Anne's death and in getting rid of Anne from court. Now he's lost Jane. So I feel like Thomas Cromwell was trying to scramble things together for Henry to put himself back in the limelight and to try and stay up there. And as we know, he was believed to have shown a portrait painted by our lovely friend again, Holbein, of Anne of Cleves. So Anne of Cleves was the daughter of the Duke John III of Cleves and Maria of Jülichberg. Excuse my pronunciation, that might not be quite right. They were
Jülichberg.
Pardon?
Jülichberg.
Yeah, well done.
Got that right.
They were very well done. I'm impressed. They were a very influential and powerful family. And this, if they were to get Henry VIII and Anne of Cleves together, it would be such a strong political connection, because it would be a strong union against the Catholics of Europe, which were growing stronger and stronger against the monarchy at that time. So I think Thomas Cromwell obviously went to meet Anne of Cleves with several other people. Henry never saw her. He only saw this portrait. So he was fed all the feedback. Yes, I've been to see her. She's a fine looking woman. This is the portrait of her. So Henry came round to the idea of this union, that he was feeling lonely. He was feeling a bit lost without Jane. And he was quite excited about the thought of having another wife on the scene, and also having that real solid foundation of a political connection with Germany.
He needed that connection, especially after you know, again, Catherine of Aragon, etc., because he lost, you know, a lot of friends, because obviously Catherine, quite a powerful woman in her own right, connected to a powerful family.
He was. So and he was appealed, you know, it was very appealing for him, wasn't it, to have a strong ally in Germany, because this family were from Dusseldorf. So she was born on the 22nd, we know the date of this, she was born on the 22nd of September in 1515. She was very bright, she was educated in politics. She didn't really know the etiquette of court. She didn't speak very good English, but she was very bright and she was a very quick learner. So the arrangements were made for her to come over to England and to meet Henry. And Henry was growing really, really impatient. And apparently on New Year's Day, he heard that she'd reached Rochester. And this is where the famous meeting happened. He rode to Rochester to meet her, but he didn't want her to know who he was. So apparently he dressed in disguise and he opened the door to where she was staying. And they both kind of jumped back, apparently, and were repelled by each other. She was shocked that this strange man had entered her room. And he was shocked by how she looked, because she, in his opinion, she didn't look like the portraits that or how she had been described. So they were both a bit shocked and taken aback. And it kind of left them in a bit of a strange predicament, really, because obviously the marriage had been planned and everything was sort of being carried along because they needed this strong political union. They needed to solidify these relations. So he was finding it very difficult to back out. And I think he even spoke to his Privy Council and said, look, I'm not sure about this. And they really pushed him forwards with it because it needed to go ahead. And although apparently Anne of Cleves was a really lovely lady, I think she was in stark contrast to the other ladies of court. She was German, so their dress was very stark in contrast. She had a very sort of pointed headdress. Apparently she was quite a plain looking lady. She wasn't unpleasant on the eye, but she was a very plain looking lady. And it just wasn't, she just wasn't to Henry's taste. There was just no chemistry there. So it was a really, really difficult situation. And I think some of the Henry's court taught her to play cards. She ended up becoming a really good card player. So her and Henry started to play cards. And I think they did form a bit of a friendship. And they got married relatively quickly. So on the 6th of January, age 24, she became, this is in 1540 now, she became Henry's 4th wife. And I think it just didn't go anywhere. Some say they didn't even consummate the marriage because there was just no chemistry. Nothing happened. And he became more and more angry, which was a shame because apparently she was also a very lovely lady. She was quite popular in court. She really embraced Mary and Elizabeth also, and they became very good friends with her. So it was very frustrating that there was just no chemistry and it just wasn't going to work for Henry. So he decided that he wanted the marriage annulled. And this really put the fear of God into Anne of Cleves because she knew what had happened to his previous wives. And she said to have confided in people saying, oh, I know what's happened is Henry, if Henry doesn't want to be with me, am I going to be killed? You know, am I going to be beheaded or burned? And so they ended up getting an annulment, but because he wanted to keep good relations with her and good relations with her country and with her family, he actually really looked after Anne of Cleves. He really gifted her with so many riches. She ended up living at Hever Castle. She lived out her life there. And in fact, she outlived all of his wives and she outlived Henry. She had a very, very happy life. She was invited back to court. She became really good friends with a lot of people in court, including Henry himself, who treated her and referred to her as his sister. So they still had this really good relationship. And I think they actually later on in life became really good friends. He used to spend time with her, play cards together, you know, so it was a friendship more than anything else. There just wasn't that chemistry there. There wasn't that love there.
It was a bit of a strange one with Anne of Cleves. As you say, you know, Cromwell, he was pushing and pushing because he knew his skin was on the line, basically. And then when Henry finally sees Anne of Cleves, you know, it's a case of, oops. But the deal had to go through. The deal had been done.
That's it, exactly. They couldn't back out.
So Henry's standing there, even though he's King of England, you know, he's standing there thinking, right, I'm not attracted to this woman, but we need this, we need this alliance. You know, we need this to get through. And maybe he did, you know, after the annulment, as you say, he had to keep her on his good side. You know, he couldn't do away with her.
No, exactly.
You know, because that would have been another war for him to handle, probably. Because her brother was quite a powerful man.
And this is the thing, if you think she left her homeland, she left Germany, she left her family, and although she stayed in touch with her brother, she never actually saw her family again. But apparently she lived out quite a happy life. As I say, she was very looked after. He really did look after her. He sent her gifts and money and riches. She was a very, very rich lady. She was allowed to see who she wanted to see, do what she wanted to do. She could come back to court. She even came to future coronations of his queens. I mean, it was quite an unusual compared to the other wives. When you think of how long he was with Catherine of Aragon and how short a time he was with Anne of Cleves, he looked after her so well, so well. And she was very, very good friends with Mary and Elizabeth, his two daughters. They were incredibly fond of her, and they used to spend a lot of time at Hever Castle with her. You know, so it was a really positive relationship out of all of the wives that he had. I feel like Anne of Cleves, although she spent one of the shortest times with him, she had the most fruitful relationship in so many ways.
I think Anne of Cleves, out of the 6 wives, Anne of Cleves get the best deal.
She did. Oh yeah, by far. Absolutely.
You know, undoubtedly, when you think what happened to the other one, and plus the other thing is, I think Henry would have warmed to her because I think at the same time, I might be wrong with this, but I think at the same time he was starting to warm back to Mary.
Yes, yeah, they were becoming closer. Yeah, absolutely.
Him and Mary were bright getting that bond back. Even though she was Kathleen's daughter, but him and Mary were starting to get that bond back, and I think because Anna Cleves and Mary had that bond, not so much Elizabeth. I think Henry still resented Elizabeth a little bit because she was Anne's daughter.
Yeah, and as she got older, she really reminded him of Anne Boleyn and her strong character.
But the thing you got to ask yourself is, Elizabeth would have reminded Henry of Anne. Was it a case of because A, he despised Anne, or B, was it through guilt because he knew Anne had been innocent, and so he couldn't look at Elizabeth because he had this guilt.
Yeah,
but he could maybe look at her through Anna Cleves. Indirect. I know what I'm trying to say. Indirectly.
Yeah, absolutely.
There was still that kind of contact there.
Yeah. Yeah, and as I say, she spent a lot of time at court. She'd very often come to court to functions and occasions and coronations, and she was welcomed by everybody. She was a very popular lady, and she was a very quick learner because, as I said, she came from Germany. She didn't speak much English. She didn't know the etiquette of court, but she learnt to dance. She learnt to play cards. She was a really good card player, apparently, and she learnt that when she came over to England. And she just learnt to speak English really well. He even lent on Anne for, they had political conversations. She was sort of well versed in politics and learnt how the court operated. So she really did become a really good, strong support for Henry, never in a sort of a wifely way, but in a really strong friendship way. And I think he really valued her. I think he really valued that union, even though it was different to how they anticipated. And they say it was never consummated, which is why he could have the annulment, 6 months down the line.
I was going to say, do you think it was a wake-up call for Henry with Anna Cleves? Because, here's this woman, she's from Germany, looks-wise, she's nothing what he expected. He just wanted to be married to her. But then, do you think he was kind of surprised? I was going to say fell for her. He didn't fall, but that he found himself warming to her.
He warmed to her, absolutely. That's it. I think the first was he was a bit annoyed and angry that she wasn't the woman he thought she was going to be in looks. Because at the end of the day, his wives were chosen on looks, weren't they? He was attracted to people in court. That's how he got to know people. And then to see this German woman who was quite stark in contrast, she was described as being quite big built, had quite a presence about her, quite a broad face. Even though she wasn't ugly or unpleasant to look at, she wasn't his usual type, whatever his usual type was, because they were all quite different, his wives, weren't they? But I think he really did learn to respect her because he realized that she was a good person. She was very bright, very intelligent. He could have good conversations with her, and she formed really good friendships and kept his family together, as in Mary and Elizabeth. She brought them all together really, really well. And they spent a lot of time at Hever Castle, which ironically was where Anne Boleyn and her sister grew up, wasn't it?
Aye, that was and then also the fact that his first two wives, he married them because he was attracted to them. It was his choice.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But with Anna Cleves, it was a different kind of ball game.
Yeah.
It wasn't his choice. He was more or less pushed into it, so he didn't have. How do you put it? Henry would have been used to getting his own way. Obviously, he's a king, But with Anna Cleves, he never got his own way because he was told basically, you need to marry this woman,
Yeah.
Whereas before, and with his other wives as well, the next two, he picked them. He met them, as you say, face to face. He picked them.
Yeah.
I want to marry you, etc. But with Anna Cleves, it was a whole different ballgame.
Yeah, that's right.
You need to marry them, Your Majesty. You need this alliance. You need to pay X amount to her brother to get this to go through. Otherwise, you're on your backside.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah, absolutely. And as we said before, when we mentioned in one of our previous chats that this was the start of the downfall, or wasn't really the start, it was a continuation of the downfall of Thomas Cromwell, because although he did become, Henry became great friends with Anne of Cleves, Thomas had failed him in finding him a wife that he wanted. And so Thomas Cromwell, you know, his time was running out, wasn't it? Because this was a big nail in his coffin when he said, yes, I've met this woman, here's a portrait, you need to go forwards with this marriage. You know, that really solidified his fate, unfortunately, which we know was not very good. He ended up losing his head, didn't he?
Basically, he's just went and lied to Henry.
Yeah.
You know, and Henry would have been sitting there thinking, you lied to me for your own benefit, to save your own skin. And let's face it, well, even, I don't know, lying to the king these days wouldn't be a good idea, but however, you know, lying to Henry VIII wasn't a great thing to do back then. You know, considering everybody in court on a daily basis didn't know who was going to lose their head and who wasn't.
Yeah.
You know, didn't know what kind of mood the king was going to be when he got out of bed.
Yeah.
So what it did add to Cromwell's downfall, which was his own doing.
Absolutely did. Yeah.
Nobody else to blame for it. And, you know, with Anne of Cleves, it was just another nail in his coffin. And I don't think it was long after that he departed, shall we say.
No, exactly. I don't think it was at all. But interestingly, whilst Anne of Cleves, I mean, we will talk about her death and everything, but while she was still alive, obviously Catherine Howard was introduced to Henry. We will talk about that, I know, in another session, because we've still got 2 more wives to talk about, which we'll save. But Catherine Howard was introduced, who was a very young, flirty, funny girl. You know, she was very light-hearted and quite innocent again. And I think Anne of Cleves really backed her. She really pushed her towards Henry, because she said to Henry that she really approved of Catherine. It was what he needed. He needed somebody who was fun and who was light-hearted. So Anne of Cleves was a real supporter of Catherine Howard, obviously, when she came onto the scene. But after living out a wonderful life, because as we say, she had the shortest marriage to Henry, but she lived out a wonderful life thanks to being in his company. She sadly passed away on the 16th of July. She was aged 41, which was a really good age back then. She died in 1557. And as I say, she lived her life at Hever Castle, but she was buried at Westminster Abbey. And that was courtesy of Mary I. Mary I was very good friends with Anne of Cleves, and she insisted that she was buried at Westminster Abbey, which was a really special place to be buried then. So she had a really good funeral, a really good send-off. And I know that Mary I was absolutely instrumental in making sure that happened.
So, she'd formed this bond with him.
Yeah, and she, like I said, she outlived all of them. So Anne of Cleves survived all of his wives and Henry VIII. So she outlived all of them. So Mary and her and Elizabeth would have been, you know, left behind with their friendship. And obviously that must have been a big loss when Anne of Cleves died for the 2 girls. And so that's why Mary was instrumental in her send-off, her funeral, and where she was buried.
Because it would have been a big loss, because her father by then, he was gone.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, that's it. Absolutely.
They didn't have their mothers either.
No, I
know. Maybe Anne of Cleves was seen as a kind of mother figure as well.
I really believe she was, because I think Jane Seymour was instrumental in bringing them back into court and befriending them. But they were still quite young then. But obviously when Anne of Cleves was on the scene, they were that bit older. And I really do feel like they forged great relationships, all 3 of them. And they spent a lot of time together at Hever Castle. So when Anne of Cleves died, that must have been a real big loss for Mary I and Elizabeth I. It must have been such a loss for both of them, as you say, because they lost their sort of motherly figure and a friend. You know, it's kind of the end of the era for that family in a way, wasn't it?
That was it. Plus, her father was gone as well. Not that he played a bit of a major role in their lives, but still their dad, their father at the end of the day. So they, you know, the two women, 2 girls sitting there thinking, we've got nobody left. All they've got now is whoever's at court.
Yeah, I know. And what we haven't said, of course, which is really important, is that Jane Seymour's son, Edward VI, when Henry died, he became king at age 9, and he sadly passed away at age 15, so he was very young. But during his short reign, Jane Seymour's brother that we mentioned earlier, who was Edward, he was the Duke of Somerset. He kind of oversaw, because obviously the king was so young, being Henry's son, he oversaw the reign, and he was kind of the spokesperson for Edward VI. But he was a very sickly child, apparently, even though Henry had tried his best to protect him and lock him away, keep him away from court, keep him away from big crowds of people. He was a very sickly child, and passed away sadly at the age of 15. So his only male heir didn't actually last that long.
Mm-hmm.
So, but yeah, Jane Seymour's family, they were very instrumental, really, in bringing Jane into court, but then also supporting young Edward VI in his short reign. So,
And another thing is, I'm going on the paranormal side now.
yeah.
You know, I mean, all Henry's wives, you know, apart from Anna Cleves, have been reported being seen somewhere. Jane Seymour, every year is reported to be seen on the Starlight Staircase in Hampton Court Palace on the anniversary of, I was going to say Elvis. Jeez, Ed. Oh, why?
Been done too much.
I'm all red. I just noticed I'm all kind of red. That's what the sun does in Scotland. Corned beef. Aye, so Jane's reported to be seen as an anniversary haunting every year. An anniversary of Edward's passing on the Starlight Staircase, as it's called, which led up to Edward's former bedroom.
Yeah.
The only wife that, though I can't find any record, I might be wrong, that's never been reported to be seen as Anna Cleves.
I know, isn't that interesting? Isn't that interesting? But I think she had the most peaceful and happy life. Okay, she was away from her family, which was sad in a way because she never saw her family back in Germany again, but she did keep in touch with her brothers she was very close to. But I feel like she had a very happy life. So in my mind, when you get a haunting, for instance, you would think Anne Boleyn would haunt because she'd be so bitter and twisted about what happened to her and she was beheaded so unfairly. Surely she'd more likely want to haunt or be haunted because she couldn't accept her death. Whereas I feel Anne of Cleves lived out her life to a full, and she got to the age of, what do we say, 41.
41.
That was a really good age back then. So she probably died peacefully. She had everything she wanted. She didn't want for anything. So therefore, why would she want to come back? She'd be up in the spirit realms living a life of Riley because she made her peace down here. Whereas the other wives, I feel, died quite tragically. So therefore, you know, they probably are going to come back and haunt and be bitter and twisted and might appear at certain anniversaries. Who knows?
Well, I mean, there are stories. Catherine of Aragon knows so much. I mean, Anne Boleyn, she's been reported in about 10 or 12 different places. But what's to me is debatable, you know. She's been reported in places like, you know, the Tower of London, Hampton Court Palace, Hever Castle, Salisbury Hall, places like that, you know. But my mindset is people at these places have reported seeing a lady, you know, but because Anne Boleyn is associated with that building, they automatically think it's Anne Boleyn.
Yeah.
You know, so Anne Boleyn haunts here and there. You know, she's all over the place. Do you know what I mean? I think if Anne was going to haunt anywhere, it would be Hever Castle, where she was brought up. But that's just my opinion. But as you say, you know, I mean, Jane Seymour, Starlight Staircase, Catherine Howard, too, we'll talk about later on. The Great Gallery, Hampton Court Palace.
Yeah.
You know, there's documented reports, but Anna Cleves just seems to have passed away and disappeared.
Yeah.
I mean, as you say, she is, you know, as you say, she led a good life. She passed at a good age. I was going to say old, but and she had everything she wanted, so maybe she's and she never had any kids or any children to come back and look over or anything, you know, watch over. So maybe that's why there's never been any reported sightings of her.
Yeah.
I just found it weird.
It is weird. I've never really thought about that, but I just feel like if you look at the other wives, they died quite tragically. Apart from Catherine Parr, his last wife, obviously, she survived Henry and then married her true love, which was John Seymour. So and she ended up marrying the person that she really wanted to marry, and then died later on in life. So again, she kind of lived out her life how she wanted to, because she didn't really want to marry Henry, but obviously she was put in his path and he wanted to marry her. So, but the others were quite tragic, weren't they? Catherine of Aragon, you can imagine her soul must have been destroyed with him shunning her and being so cruel to her after so many years of her love and support. Anne Boleyn was totally set up. Yes, she was outspoken and flirty and probably outrageous on occasions, but she had so many knives in her back. You'd think she'd want to come back and haunt and speak her case, wouldn't you? Catherine of Howard also lost her life. She was beheaded. We'll talk about her in the next session. But you know, she was so young when she was beheaded, and she was, in my mind, she was a very naive, innocent girl who was just used as a pawn. You know, she was probably abused by all of these people that she was kept in custody with somebody, and you know, men were allowed in the house, and she would have been abused by what we know as paedophiles nowadays. So she had a very tragic life, and you know, lost her life. So I wouldn't be surprised if they come back and haunt. You know, they're not at rest. We'd like to think we could say prayers for them and put them at rest, but it doesn't work like that, unfortunately. But Anne of Cleves, yeah, it's interesting because when you talk about the wives of Henry VIII, Anne of Cleves is the one that people don't talk about much, because they think, well, there's not much to say about Anne of Cleves. But actually, she had a huge impact on Henry and on his daughters. And like we said, she was the most prosperous out of all of them. So she was, you know, very lucky, really. She fell on her feet, didn't she?
That's I just say, not many people talk about her, and I think that's some because, you know, the marriage didn't last that long, and so after she was the king's wife, she was people lost interest in her. Same as history lost interest in her, but people seem to forget that, as you say, you know, she did have a life after it. She was a person. She came from somewhere. She went somewhere. But because she wasn't married to the king anymore, she was of no interest.
Yeah, absolutely.
She was out the limelight, and that was it. Done. Who's next?
Think Anne Cleves is quite fascinating, actually, even though people don't talk about her very much. I find her quite intriguing because she was German. She was different, you know. So
considering she was German, her English wasn't good at all. And, you know, all of a sudden she's told that you're going to England, you're going to marry the King of England. And, you know, she's just put on a boat, sent over to England, and all of a sudden she's in this whole strange new country. When they first met, you know, she was kind of, well, who are you, sort of thing. And there's been 1,001 things going through her mind.
Yeah.
And I think the biggest thing going through her mind was her knowing that there was nothing she could do about it.
No, I know. Imagine that, coming to a foreign country, knowing that you're going to be married off to a king that you haven't met, who's beheaded a wife, you know, before, and divorced another one who'd supported him for so many years. I mean, it does make you wonder what did go through her mind.
And she probably knew, you know, if I decide not to marry him, it's going to create a whole load of trouble, possibly a war. Plus, I've got no way of getting back to, you know, Germany.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Would you have been homeless, basically?
Yeah, yeah.
You know,
so it was very, I mean, I was going to say it was very lucky that Henry looked after her, but although he genuinely did care for her, and I feel they became very good friends, I think for political reasons, as you say, he couldn't get rid of her anyway. He wanted to keep that political alliance just by looking after her and having that friendship.
He had to keep her in a good books. He had to make sure she was looked after, because even though she didn't see her family or whatever, there would have been people, you know what it was like, right? There were spies everywhere. So there would have been people reporting back to her family. You know, right, this has happened, she's living here. And Henry would have known this.
Yeah.
And so, you know, well, I need to make sure she's looked after, because word's going to get back to the in-laws, basically. And I'll be buggered, basically. So, you know, that would have played a major part in his mind.
Oh, absolutely.
and this is what people tend to forget. You know, at the end of the day, she was a woman. She came from a foreign country, didn't have a clue what was happening to her or what was going to happen to her. She was still young, you know, and but it turned out pretty well for her.
It turned out very well compared to the other
Not
wives.
too shabby.
Not too shabby, as they say.
No, I mean, but I think what we'll do is we'll wind it up there, Doc. Unless there's anything else we've missed out, is there?
No, I don't think so. I think, you know, it's interesting, isn't it? When we said we we're going to talk about Jane Seymour and Anne of Cleves, you think, oh, they weren't a huge part in Henry's life. We won't have a lot to say, but actually both of them have quite an interesting backstory and an interesting story within the court. So I think that all of the queens of Henry VIII have got, you know, equal time to chat about them because they all had their own backstory. They all had their own personalities, their lives before Henry and after, well, not really after Henry, for most of them, let's face it. So yeah, I don't think you ever run out of things to say about his wives, about Henry and about that era, because as we said before, it's fascinating. I'm really passionate about it. I love it. So glad that you love it as well, because it's great to talk about it. A lot of my
I've always been, I've said this many times, quite a few people, I've always been fascinated with the Tudor.
Yeah, absolutely.
I don't know what, it's just
something about it just draws you in.
Maybe I lived back then. Maybe I was a Tudor person. You know,
maybe you were Henry VIII, maybe I was Anne Boleyn, who knows? Possibly
with you lost your head. So you watch your step. Watch your step, Missy, because you know what happened the last time. You know what I'm saying? So, it's just such a fascinating thing, you know, because after the next part is going to be, you know, his last two wives, you know, Catherine
and they're interesting as well in their own right. I've done my research on them and they're quite fascinating.
As you said, they're all fascinating because they've all, you know, they didn't just drop out a cloud, marry Henry, then, you know, whatever way they then disappear.
No.
They all had a life.
Exactly. They've all got their own backstory. Yeah.
And some after court. But see, next time you're going to be Catherine Howard and Catherine Parr. And then we'll be moving on to the behind the scenes.
Yeah.
Because there was a lot of people going on. There was a lot of workings going on behind the scenes with Thomas More, Cromwell, Wolsey, Brandon.
Absolutely. Fascinating people.
The list is kind of like that. I know you mentioned, you know, no forgetting the foreign people, the ambassadors and everything that were in there.
Yeah.
Throwing their 10 pence in the, you know, the bucket as well. So there's that, you know, but we'll take care of the other two wives first and then we can move on to the people behind the scenes.
As long as people haven't got bored of us talking about the Tudors, we could talk about the Tudors till kingdom come, couldn't we? Because basically there are so many people, like we said, behind the scenes, in the Privy Council, beyond. You've got Mary, you've got Elizabeth and what happened when they reigned. So there, you could just go on, couldn't you, really? So if people don't want to get bored and fall asleep, we'll just talk forever.
That's it, basically. But we'll wind up there, folks. Where can people find you, Tracy?
So on Facebook, they'll find me, Tarot Tracey. They'll find me in your friends list, or if they private message me, I can link them in. My account's quite private, so but people can find me in your friends, or as I said, if they DM me, I can link them into my account, so they can find me that way. Because obviously, yeah, I do tarot card readings and lead circles, development circles, and various bits and pieces. So there are quite a few strings to my bow. And I'm also training in something quite exciting at the moment, which I will reveal a little bit further on down the line, because I've got a little way to go yet. But yeah, I'm doing something exciting where I'm going off in a slightly different direction, but it's all very exciting. So I'll let you know about that in due course.
No bungee jumping or skydiving or anything like that.
How did you guess?
I'm just wondering, you know, abseiling down Everest or something like that, you know. You know, I'll keep a hold of you for a wee minute after we come off, Doll, if that's all right. So, she's there. Big thanks to this lady here. Just try to be funny. I'm the only funny one here. She's no funny. I am. She's not. I'm hilarious. I put my up, I was going to say. Aye, so big thanks to this young lady here. We will be back with the next two wives, and as we just said, we'll be carrying on, etc. after it. We're back on next Tuesday with Mandy Cummings from Ghost Sisters. It's been a long time since we spoke to Mandy. So we're looking forward to her coming back. But we are out investigating on Saturday. We are heading to our second home. And I'm not talking about my villa in the Swiss Alps. I'm talking about Loudon-Kirk.
Brilliant.
There'll be Sarah, Laura, myself, Rigger, and Liz. Forgot her name. Liz from Spig will be there, and we've got a wee guest coming along as well, Rebecca Jackson, who is a hypnotist therapist kind of person. She's always been interested in paranormal, and now she wants to kind of start her journey. So we have her coming on the show, and she wants to start doing her paranormal journey to see what it's like. So she's coming with us on Saturday night to Loudon-Kirk. And we will be going live on Facebook. It's meant to be sunny. The weatherman's saying it's going to be sunny. So fingers crossed he's still saying that on Saturday.
Did I say it's been 27 degrees here today? 27 degrees, and it's the 1st of May. What's going on?
I know I had the shorts and vest top on today, and I'm not apologising for it, as you can see. I've got the spec line as well. That's the trouble with being bald. You get a good suntan, you take your specs off, and you get the 2 white lines, one on either side of your head.
Oh, bless you.
You know, it doesn't interfere with my handsome looks. Don't get me wrong. You know, they stick. But I'm going to stop talking rubbish because we're going to go. So thanks again to this lady and for watching. And
pleasure. Nice to see
you
everyone
on Saturday and next Tuesday. Take care, folks. Bye. Bye.